This is Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium.
Today's guest is Mike Dawes. Mike is an English guitarist known for composing, arranging, and performing multiple parts simultaneously on a single guitar. He is regarded as one of the world's most creative modern fingerstyle guitarists with a repertoire spanning original viral videos and popular arrangements alongside mainstream chart success performing with Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues. Mike has been named as the best acoustic guitarist in the world 2 years in a row, 2017 and 2018, by Total Guitar Magazine and MusicRadar reader polls, with numerous second-place rankings in the preceding years. YouTube personality Rick Beato named Mike one of the finest acoustic guitar players in the world. It's a pleasure to have you on, Mike.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. I know it's so interesting because I just saw you recently here in Tarrytown, New York with the Moody Blues, and also your solo part in the beginning. And I was just blown away. I mean, I met you in the lobby and everything, but to see you perform live, not just, follow you on YouTube, but it's pretty incredible the work you do, just creating a whole band with one instrument. So you'll have to tell us all about that.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And yes, I remember you from Tarrytown. It was that was a fun concert on a very fun tour. That was an interesting one because, well, I've been playing guitar for and opening for Justin Hayward for 11 years now. Time flies, like just over a decade. But we also had Christopher Cross on the tour. So it was a tour of just great people, great music, and great vibes. So I'm glad you had fun at the show. What I do essentially, and one of the reasons that I think Justin hired me to play these Moody Blues tunes in the first place, is that I play guitar in a little bit of an unusual way. I grew up in a small town without many other musicians to kind of play with, right? So when I discovered the acoustic guitar, you can see behind me on our little Zoom call here, there's some acoustic guitars as well as a little electric guitar over there. When I went to the acoustic guitar, I realized that if you played with your fingers instead of a guitar pick, you could actually play multiple parts, at once. And I was from a small town with a small guitar teacher. I didn't really know a lot of this stuff. I think actually hearing Dire Straits, Sultans of Swing, Mark Knopfler playing with his fingers instead of a guitar pick totally blew my mind, as a kid. And I started experimenting with that, discovered a lot of the great masters of this style as a result. And because it's an acoustic guitar, you can also beat it like a drum. It's a big hollow instrument. You can use your wrists and your fists and fingernails and everything to create all these interesting textures on the body of the instrument. And the one-man band thing is a bit of a cliche. When someone says one-man band, you imagine someone in the high street with cymbals on their back and an accordion and bicycle horns under their armpits. But this
hilarious.
I like to think of this as trying to get as much out of a single acoustic guitar as possible and making an entertaining live experience out of that as well.
Well, let me tell you, it's very interactive because as you started to talk about it, and then you said there's just one string that I press to make it sound like, playing the bass. And I didn't really realize that. And once you told us, then I was listening for all the parts.
That's great. Yeah, well, part of the, I find it quite interesting trying to explain what I do to people because it helps so much if you just see the show. Because when someone sees on paper, oh, it's a guy playing guitar, that turns off a lot of people, especially non-guitar players. And I realized when I was given this great opportunity to open for Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues, people aren't there to see a guy play guitar. They're there to hear the songs that mean so much to them, So I realized that explaining what I was doing and turning the show into an interactive experience, it left all the non-guitar players wanting more as well as the guitar players, So I think what you're referring to is there's a part of the show where I break it down really and just add one layer at a time until I get this full band arrangement. And it helps when people are sat right at the back of the room and can't really see what's going on. It helps them. And I'm glad you picked up on that because that was obviously an intentional part of the show to try and elevate the non-guitarist's experience. Yeah.
Yes, but it's so interesting because when I first walked into the Tarrytown experience, the woman next to me said, "Are you here for the Moody Blues?" I said, "No, I'm actually here for Christopher Cross." And then after you did your part, I turned around and I said, I think we're both here for him. And she laughed.
That's so sweet. Well, it was a great privilege to be able to open for that tour because that was actually a Christopher Cross and Justin Hayward co-bill. And just to have the opportunity to go out and just warm up the crowd, even for just a very short little set at the beginning, was an opportunity that those guys didn't really have to give me, and I appreciate that very much.
Well, I think the audience appreciated it really well because you really had an overwhelming response, even everyone that followed you into the lobby. So that's great.
Bless you. Yeah, do you remember the Tarrytown lobby? It was at sort of a 45-degree angle, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's an iconic place. It's over 100 years old. I know. So it's every time people go there, it's their first time. They always make comments on like the sloping lobby.
Yeah, it's Sleepy Hollow, isn't it? It's all a little bit spooky around that area.
That's right. That's right. I think that theater might also be a little haunted, but I'm not going to give out any dark secrets.
I don't know if you noticed this. I don't know if you noticed this, but right up at the back from the stage, we can see this at the very back on the balcony. There's a skeleton. There's a ghost sitting in one of the seats, and we stare at him during sound check. It is very unsettling. Tarrytown Music Hall, very scary place.
I think they do that on purpose.
Yeah.
Very cool. So what time around your timeline for age-wise were you really picking up the guitar? I mean, were you like 10 years old? Like, where were we in your life?
More or less. Well, the interesting thing is I didn't start with the guitar. I started on the keyboard and the trumpet because my mum owned the keyboard and my dad played the trumpet. And music was prevalent in our house, but only really passively. My dad was playing in various bands, but he wouldn't play much around the house. But it was listening to things on the radio. And at the time, this was the mid to late 90s, and it was a lot of 80s music on the radio, a lot of Phil Collins, a lot of Genesis, some prog, but some more poppy kind of prog as well. And I remember it was particularly the melody to Another Day in Paradise, Phil Collins, ding, 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 da, da, ding, ding. I figured it out by pressing my finger on all the white notes of my mum's keyboard. And the feeling I got of just like figuring that out was so satisfying. And then it was actually age 12, I moved to a new school. And I wasn't very socially confident, and I noticed that the cool kid at the school played the guitar, and I begged and begged and begged and begged my mum and dad to get me a cheap little electric guitar for my birthday, which I'm very grateful that they did, because it allowed me to fit in socially and kind of find myself as a preteen. But also, as soon as I got that first riff down on the guitar, I was hooked. That was it. It was the guitar for me. So age 12, that was. But then age 17, I switched to the granddaddy guitar, the acoustic guitar, and the rest is history.
That's so interesting. I think it really helps that your parents were musical because, they say it's in the genes. It was definitely in the genes with you. But, playing by ear, I think that's what you were referencing when you were able to listen to Phil Collins and then play the notes on the computer. On the keyboard. It's kind of interesting because not many people can do that. And I think that's something that when you do realize you have something, that actually propels you into that even more because you know that you're different. Like if you were playing with other kids or talking to other kids and you said, can you hear it? Some of them can't, and I think when you're growing up, like in music, that makes kind of a difference in your mind of who's really going to go somewhere with this and who maybe not. Do you agree?
I think that's a really good observation. I think that learning to use your ear is the most valuable skill you can have doing music, of course. Despite what any YouTube tutorial would have you think, if you can't hear that you're playing it wrong, then that's a bad sign. I will say something very, 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 very important, which is very hard to teach, is actually rhythm. I used to teach music and teach guitar as well before I had this touring career. And teaching someone that had no sense of rhythm how to feel time was the most challenging part of that. You could teach someone to use their ear through interval training and things like that, but I will agree that it comes a lot more naturally than others. I remember back in the day I was in a band and the bass player had a bass teacher that would have to tap him on the head to keep him in time, So things like that were a little harder for some people. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think a natural ability to hear and figure out melodies and rhythms is is very advantageous if you're going to effectively do music as a living or just as a lifelong passion, really.
You know, you mentioned I'm older than you. It's obvious, but you mentioned the 90s. And, you know, a lot of us that grew up in the 80s were kind of battling the 90s because the 90s was really a bit of a shift in music. And it put a lot of artists, you know, out of business, you would say, or
Mm.
having to be forced into a different world. So if you think of the bands like Nirvana, you know, that whole wave that came through in the 90s really kind of changed the face of a lot of music. So when you listen to things like Phil Collins and then in the 90s, what was your influences in the 90s since there was such a big change in music front?
It's really interesting because I was born in summer '89, right? So my awareness of trends wasn't really there in the '90s. You know, bear in mind I turned 10 in 2000, right? So at that time it was whatever was marketed towards kids, that's what I was into. So it was, you know, new metal, it was early Eminem, you know, it was whatever was in the charts, the Spice Girls, you know, whatever it may be. So I didn't have the context. It was only later when I started studying music that I learned about the '90s and that shift, especially from the point of view of someone who wanted to eke as much out of a guitar as possible. The '90s just sounded awful because it was sort of this great turn where you had these incredible virtuoso bands being replaced by a more punk aesthetic through grunge and a more you know, Max Martin, Dennis Pop kind of school of you know, Backstreet Boys kind of manufactured bands. It was that kind of era, but it was but I didn't look at it negatively because it was, I don't know, it didn't really feel like it affected me. I was into what I was into, and what I was into was Guns N' Roses, you know, for quite a while. So I wasn't really into the grunge thing, just by whatever my taste was at the time, you know. So that's an interesting observation because maybe I was just gravitating towards more complex, widdly, you know, shreddy, guitar-y based music without any sort of marketing or anything like that influencing me. I was just into what I was into, you know. So I didn't really notice the grunge thing, honestly. Although I did enjoy Soundgarden, I will say.
Oh, wow. Soundgarden. Yeah. You know, it's interesting that you pick up on Guns N' Roses because that is Slash. And I'm
Hmm.
actually going to see Slash on Sunday here in New York City. And he's
Oh,
kind of,
awesome.
yeah, he's gone into this whole blues scene and he's got a lot going on right now with his Serpent Tour and all this stuff. But,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, it's amazing because I've seen Slash numerous times. And I mean, he becomes one with his guitar. So I could totally see you kind of getting connected to, you know, Guns N' Roses and to the music that they were playing at the time. That to me is amazing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember, I think I got the Guns N' Roses live album. And that was the first time I'd ever heard a live album, and I must have been like, you know, 12 or something, because I remember as soon as I got that first guitar, I immediately wanted to be Slash. And, you know, I think the aforementioned cool kid had a Les Paul, and he was learning all those riffs, and just seeing those videos on MTV, you know, Axl Rose jumping off an oil tanker and swimming with dolphins, and Slash ripping a guitar solo outside a church, you know, at the climax of a song, Axl Rose diving through the $16,000 wedding cake. This excess and ridiculousness, right, just really appealed to me. I just thought it was funny, honestly, because bear in mind I'm from a small town in England. We don't dive through $16,000 wedding cakes. That's just not a thing. So it was just ridiculous, and I loved it, and the music and the whole, you know, big crowd sound kicking into Night Train, Appetite for Destruction, all of that stuff. Love it, love it, love it. I just knew I wanted to play guitar, but more importantly, I wanted to play live shows. That's why I've been on the road like, you know, 10 months of the year for so long. Admittedly, I do want to dial it back a little bit as I get older, but you know, I just love playing in front of audiences. I love that feeling, and in my mind, somewhere in the recesses, even when I'm playing Nights in White Satin with Justin Hayward, I'm actually playing November Rain outside of a church in a desert, you know.
That's hilarious. That is so great. You know, November Rain. I distinctly remember being in the back of a cab in New York City with one of my friends from the music business, and they were saying the date that the November Rain was coming out. It was 1993. And here we are, iconically in the back of a cab in New York City, and it's pouring rain outside, and the video is of pouring rain. It's like
of course.
kind of such a memory implanted in my mind. But, you know, it's interesting, the performing thing, because how were you in school? Like getting up in front of your class? Like, did you recognize that early that you were able to do that? Because that in itself is a gift. Being afraid of people is a lot of things that performers actually like have a hard time admitting.
That's a really good question, and no one's actually asked me about that time before. So I am a very extroverted live performer now, as you have seen at Tarrytown. However, I was predicted by my teacher to fail music. I was predicted an F when I was about 16 years old. Yet I got the highest score that the school had ever had, right? Why is that? Well, first of all, they must have got it wrong, because there's no way I am worthy of that honor. But secondly, the reason is that I never played in front of anyone ever, not even the teachers. I was so shy that I did all my work, all my coursework, all my practice in private in a room, because the aforementioned cool kid at school was the extrovert. He was the handsome guy at the front. He would always turn the amp up really loud so all the girls could hear him play. And I was the opposite. I was the get on with my study, just fulfill that internal satisfaction and not look for the external gratification. You know, contrary to what I said about the ripping live albums of Guns N' Roses, I was playing for myself. You know, it was my own fantasy that I was creating through learning guitar. So when I ended up playing, I kind of aced everything. But because I was just so involved in guitar, nothing else mattered, right? No social reward mattered. Instead of going out partying, I was just playing guitar in my bedroom, you know, for years and years and years and years. And if anyone wants to get good at an instrument, you know, there's Andy Suzuki, Christopher Cross's saxophone player, who you saw. We were hanging out outside the venue, maybe that night or a different night, and he was saying, look, if you want to get good at something, do it the hard way. It's really that simple. You know, you're not going to get good at something unless you just put in the hours and put in the work. And that's what I was doing, but I was doing it in private because I was shy of people, you know, at school. So it took me a while to come out of my shell. I would say I only really came out of my shell live once I started touring solo as an acoustic guitar player, because there's nowhere to hide. You can't hide behind your drummer or anything like that, you know. So I had some experience doing that for a few years before I met Justin, and at that point I was confident and I was hungry and I was ready to kind of take it to that next level.
That's amazing. You know, I love your story. There's so many musicians out there that have these stories about living in a van or living on the side of the road or playing in Grand Central Station. Do you have any of those stories, or you basically like protected yourself until you were ready to come out of the shell?
Well, not quite that, because I had to make a living, you know, and one doesn't necessarily coincide perfectly with the other timing wise. So when I left education, I actually had a record deal and a tour lined up, but unfortunately it was with an ex-partner. It was a duo act. And when the relationship fell apart, so did all of that work, and the record deal lost the record deal, all of that. So I thought I was set up to start earning some money and making a living, but I ended up unemployed and was at the job center, which is where we go in England to look for work. And I picked up a job very briefly teaching ukulele to kids. And I was very underqualified for that. It turns out if you give 30 ukuleles to troubled kids, they end up using them as baseball bats to just smack each other. So that was an adventurous story. But they paid me well, but the hours were limited. So I was supplementing that with just independent guitar lessons, just flyering all the supermarkets, flyering all the little village notices, all of that stuff. And I ended up making ends meet. I certainly wasn't living on the side of the street or anything. I had a small flat that I was sharing with another flatmate. Bear in mind, this was in 2011 through to 2013, and at that time, accommodation was just about affordable in England for young people. Now it's not so much. But yeah, so I was taking odds and sods, as we say, of guitar lessons, you know, and then ultimately what happened is I started putting music on the internet. It kind of took off, and I was getting all these international touring offers, and it got to a point where I had to stop weekend warrioring it, and I had to say, look, I'm either going to dive in with both feet and go to Asia or Australia and quit my teaching jobs, or I'm going to be stuck in the village. And I jumped in, and that was 11 years ago now. So,
That's so interesting. I always find in life, it's like the Robert Frost poem, The Road Not Taken, right? Or The Road Less Traveled, when you
yeah.
have an opportunity that you're faced with and then you think that it's set and then it turns out not to be set. You can think about that, for the rest of your life and do nothing about it. Or you can just say, I know that I was one half of that, and I'm going to make that one half my whole and move forward. And that clearly is
Interesting.
what you
Yeah.
did.
Well, it is, and interestingly, beyond that, it actually spawned one of my biggest kind of guitar moments, which was the first thing I released was an arrangement of the Gotye song "Somebody That I Used to Know." I believe I played it briefly in Tarrytown, and that is the video that Justin ended up seeing and inviting me to join his band. The reason I did that song is because it was about that relationship, somebody that I used to know. I poured all the energy, all of the trauma of losing all that stuff into that piece of art and that video and that piece of music, and that's what really took off. So there is great truth to that, when the death of creativity is like comfort and money, like when you don't have those things,
That is
wonderful creative
correct.
moments can
Yes.
happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's interesting too, because I see this very often. You can hear one song and not be moved, and another person can hear a song and say, that song changed my life. And
Hmm.
it's often when I speak with friends of mine that are musicians, and they could go on and on and on about someone else's song, because they ignited with that, even though that they didn't play it or they didn't write it or they weren't, touring with it. But it's something that it does something to them as an artist. And with you, it clearly seemed to kind of format everything, not just, your relationship experience, but also the passion that you have as a musician to take something like that and run with it. So it's kind of interesting. I always say there's karmic lessons out there, we just never know how they're going to come together for us,
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's amazing. The power of the internet is really very powerful. People could use it in positive and negative ways. I'm really great that there's people like you that, the internet has changed your life and brought it to like the next level. So that's great. How do you think, did you ever get the feedback on how he found you playing that particular song?
Well, what's interesting? There's another story in that story, which is that in 2009, I talk about being a shy performer and coming out of my shell. I played at a little. I got the opening slot for a bigger artist playing in, at the time, what was the huge venue. It was like a 900-seat venue in very similar to the Tarrytown Music Hall aesthetic with the balcony, all of that. And I was an 18-year-old. I'd never played anywhere like that, and this was the local to where I was studying. I played, and just as the opening act, there was another opener named Karima Francis, and then the headliner was this wonderful artist named Seth Lakeman. Now, I played terribly. The monitors were feeding back. I messed up all the playing. I broke a fingernail, which for a fingerstyle guitar player is quite bad. And then the fire alarm went off midway through the show. And it was just, people were just talking. No one was interested. And my family were there. I was so embarrassed. And it was the worst gig I'd ever done, still to this day. But then fast forward 2 years, the person who showed Justin my music was this woman, Karima Francis, this second artist that night who I'd never spoken to. And she remembered me from that night, and evidently something about me stuck with her for the positive. And long story short, the worst gig of my life got me the best gig of my life. And I always say this to people when I do workshops, when I do guitar workshops: don't be afraid to suck. Because you never know that if there's only one man and a dog watching your show, that one man could call you 2 years later and offer you a gig with Justin Hayward or something. So just the best way to get through this crazy creative minefield of the music business is to just get out there and gig and fly your kite, and the right person will see it. And like you're saying, it'll resonate with some people, it won't resonate with other people. Don't let the latter affect you negatively. Just keep going and keep doing your thing.
That's a wonderful story, though, because You just really don't know. But I always tell this to people, fear is a 4-letter word. And a lot of people don't recognize that. But, fear really can stop you in your tracks. I mean, that's a prime example. You've been playing for years. You're going back to 2009. Your family was at the performance. It's still the worst gig of your life, as you said. But it's there for a reason. Do you know what I mean? Because you know where
Yeah.
you came from. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
It's
and
a
if
marker
you
point. Yeah.
exactly, but if you let that word fear stop you, that would have not just been the worst gig of your life. That would have been the last gig of your life.
That's very, very true. Honestly, it really is so true. Yeah, absolutely. And you believe me, there's been some gigs that have come close to matching that. But just this weekend, I flew back from America after this Justin Hayward and Christopher Cross tour. The last show was on my birthday. We were playing with John Anderson from Yes, and Justin brings me a birthday cake and a birthday card, and we have a big celebration in the trailer. And I go to Manchester in the UK, and I just played at a heavy metal festival. Well, I was brought in to replace a band that pulled out. So I've got all these hairy dudes with beards and black t-shirts staring at the stage like, what is this guy? Why is this acoustic guitar player here? And it was one of the most fun shows ever, and it went down as one of the highlights of the festival. You've got to just dive in with both feet, no matter what the environment. And the only way to get good at that is to keep doing it over and over again. My girlfriend is getting into playing guitar and singing in a big way, and she's from New York like you, and she's starting to go out and play at various local events. And the first time she was so terrified, the second time way less terrified. You know what I mean? And also way less accepting and learning about the things like, oh, what happens if you get feedback? Oh, what happens if the sound isn't good? You can't read that stuff in a book. You have to do it, and you have to do it regularly. It's like a muscle. You can't just eat Cheez-Its for a year and go and run a marathon. You've got to do the
So
work. You've got to
true.
just keep the muscles moving.
That's so true, though. I'm so glad you mentioned, being pulled out and pulled into things. You also have done a lot of work with Periphery, which is
Yeah,
kind of like a heavy metal band, and
very heavy. Yeah,
yeah, I listened to some of their stuff on YouTube, and I found, the performances where you were playing with them, and they did an amazing. I mean, the audience could look it up, but you did Scarlet, and it was an
yeah.
acoustic version with the singer. The crowd was singing along with you. It was pretty amazing. But I think when you're in a situation like that where somebody is pulled out and you're pulled in, having had the experience working with a heavy metal crowd before probably helped you in that
Yeah.
circumstance where you just put yourself through that and just said, kind of like you can engage with the audience. You're kind of familiar with what they're all about, maybe, right?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, look at me. I mean, for people who aren't seeing this video right now, I've got a beard and long hair, and I grew up with Guns N' Roses and Iron Maiden and all that stuff. So I'm deeply ingrained into that culture, and my entire social circle is basically band members from that culture because, I've been friends with the Periphery guys since I was at college. And various other people in various metal bands. I'm very much in that scene, and I just happen to be an acoustic guitar player. I have plenty of spiky guitars in my attic. Um, some little secret spiky metal guitars, but yeah, I went out on tour with Periphery in November last year, and that was a very surprise booking. A lot of people were thinking, "Wait, who is this guy opening for Periphery?" And every night it was just a blast, and the guys say that it's like the best opener they've ever had, because the response was just so special because it was such a unique moment, and the crowd knew that, you know. So at metal concerts they have things called a wall of death, where that the audience separates and charges at each other like orcs in Lord of the Rings. I did a wall of love where I separated people but had them walk slowly and hug whilst I was playing a ballad. So kind of taking these
That's
metal
awesome.
tropes and
Yeah.
and turning them into this kind of special thing. I had dancers on stage for some shows, and there was one show we were making pancakes on stage while I was playing and then throwing them out to the audience. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is a lot more than just playing the guitar. It's just trying to give people an entertaining show so that they can forget about their mortgage and all the horrible stuff going on in their personal lives and the horrible stuff going on in the world for just for 45 minutes or an hour and a half or whatever it may be. And it doesn't really matter what the audience is or who they are or what they're a fan of. If you can deliver that, it can cross genres, and you give someone something to go home and talk about, and hopefully come back.
Yes. Well, you bring up two really good points. You bring up the idea of, your partner is now trying to get involved with the music business, and she's, learning from you and, kind of guiding herself around with this. But she's also learning the things in the business that you sometimes don't have control over. The sound system, or how things are working that night, or who's your guitar tech, or who's doing whatever, and but also, and during the same conversation, you're bringing up the things you can control, like the wall of love, or changing the audience, because back in the day they used to throw bananas at people or whatever, so it's really changing experiences, and knowing that as a musician is you can get really upset about something that you can't change, or you can take that and say, all right, well, if I can't change this, I can change that about it. So I think that's really amazing. She's very lucky to have you. With all of your years doing the guitar instruction, are you helping her in that regard? Like, are you helping her critique her guitar playing, or creating songs, or how is that working? That must be a lot of pressure for her.
Well, it's a lot of pressure for me as well, because I don't want to put on. Well, I want to be nice. That's
That
very
could be
important.
hard, right?
So I think it's just approaching things with a lot of compassion, but also respecting their independence, and ability to kind of discover things for themselves and cultivate their ear. What's that? There's that trope of, if your parents are really into something, they don't want to push it on their kids because it might actually deter them from doing it. Music is about self-discovery and self-expression at the end of the day. So I'll help where I can and step back when it is wise to step back.
That's wise words.
Well, I've learned from a few, conflicts.
Yeah,
by overstepping a little bit.
I'm sure, yeah. But everyone has their own style, and I think everyone has their own learning level. And I mean, I taught for years in the military, and you have the same body of information, but not everyone is at the same level of learning, And I think that's the piece of it, where you could speed up with probably some students and you have to slow down with some others. So just knowing that is probably give you a lot of experience in working with her, especially since you know her personally versus students.
Yeah.
So that's great.
And also, and that translates also to all the guitar workshops. I'm doing a lot of things like that at say the Guitar Summit in Mannheim, Germany, coming up in September. I'm doing like 3 different workshops there for people, and I love doing that. And oftentimes at gigs, I do workshops as well, either the next morning or maybe we hire out the venue and people can come back and learn. So yeah, there's a lot of teaching in what I do, like you say, live at the shows as well, in breaking things down. And also I have a lot of instructional courses on my website that people like. I'd say that's probably the main thing that I do when I'm not touring to sustain this kind of this music kind of lifestyle is doing the tuition courses, because this whole one-man band thing is pretty unusual on the acoustic guitar. There are absolute masters that are excelling at it, but there's not that much tuition material about it, especially some of the specific techniques that I'm doing. So making those courses from here in my studio or from other studios and putting those online, people really seem to like those. You might remember those from the Tarrytown show. I had them at the merch table on the little guitar-shaped USB sticks. People put them into their computers, and it's just hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, years of lessons. So that stuff's been put together with all of that in mind.
So that's interesting. So having the in-person coaching, like guitar coaching, doing that at a session in person, and then getting the stick and, doing the tuition schooling on their own. What would be the bridging to that? Like, what would you recommend, like anyone in the audience that wanted to, what would be the best method of that? Like meeting with you in person, or meeting with you in person at a session is not even necessary?
Yeah, well, the meeting in person thing is very rare nowadays compared to the other stuff, just because of the schedule. and the touring schedule. In the pandemic, I did a lot of Zoom stuff, which was like this, teaching. But there isn't really much time for that now, beyond my Patreon page, where I have a few people who we do a lesson once a month, But traditionally, a lot of people learn through sheet music and the guitar tab, which each one of my songs is transcribed and available for that. But the bridge would actually be the video lessons. That's what I always say to people. If we can't do in person, the second best thing is the video lessons. And if you can't do the video lessons, then there's the transcriptions. But all of this should be done with listening. Going back to the very first thing I said when we started talking, cultivating your ear and being able to listen to what someone's playing and figure it out for yourself is a really important skill. It's hard. Going back to what Andy Suzuki said of the Christopher Cross Band, if you want to get good at something, do it the hard way. Technically, you don't need any lessons from me if you're willing to do the work and just sit down and listen with your ears and use your eyes, because there is a lot of video content on YouTube where you can see what I'm doing. That will make you a better player. But the video lessons and the will help speed that process along for sure.
That's great. Yeah, I definitely had a few guys that I've interviewed on this, and one of them is Alex Michael. And I mean, he goes back to like the 80s when he was in Germany putting in a VHS tape and watching Paul Stanley moving his hands around on the guitar. He literally was pressing rewind and play, just getting each one down, And,
well, now we can film in super slow motion cameras and slow it down in super high resolution, and you can see a lot more than that. Which, funnily enough, I did a guitar course recently with Truefire, and my main guitar that I tour with, you might be able to see over here. I know it's a little blurry, but I don't have dots on the fretboard that shows where to put your fingers. So we actually taped little dots on there from a sticker sheet, just so when I was talking, people could see where I was. So a lot of arts and crafts goes into this for sure.
Oh wow, yeah, but that also shows that you don't need that anymore. And that's important for any of your students to say, you can need this in the beginning, but, it's like the training wheels. You just take them off and ride the bike, So
Absolutely.
That's really
good point.
interesting. Yeah. So I have to touch on two things before we move on, because I was at the concert. Moody Blues is just amazing, and you could really hear the crowd erupt over certain songs. Of course, Night in White Satins, the list goes on and on. Just playing that music and, not being from the era, but seeing those songs and the reactions of the songs and knowing how long the band goes back, with the memories of the band. What was your experience? Because so many people, I was telling everyone that I was going to be interviewing you, and they all were like, oh, the Moody Blues. I mean, so many people have these precious memories in their lives that are wrapped around the Moody Blues, believe it or not. What is your experience like from touring with Justin, or from playing those songs? What has been your take? Because you're probably the closest right now.
Well, I mean, I'm very close to Justin, as with his whole band and organization. I was the new kid for quite a while, but it's been 11 years, and there's been some new people since. I mean, what to say? It's a roller coaster in every sense of the word, really, because you have, first of all, this amazing artist in Justin, this amazing singer, who knows the impact that his music has on his fans. And look, let's be realistic. He could sit at home and just relax. He doesn't need to go on tour. He wrote Nights of Mice. He wrote Days of Future Past. He wrote an insane body of work that's out there spinning on the radio all over the world. The reason he tours is because he loves playing to the fans, and he knows how much that his music means to them. And he respects that so much that sometimes all the time, we have to bring our A game to back him up and make his life as easy as possible, because the pressure that man's under to deliver every night, to hit those notes. He's in his mid-70s, and it's extraordinary to watch. My mum is in her early 70s. It's like I'm relating all of this to what he does. It's incredible. All of the songs are in the original keys. There's one rehearsal once, just for fun. He said, "Oh, let's just try this song at a slightly lower key to see if it's easier to hit these notes." And we got to the first verse, and he just said, "Stop. This sounds rubbish. Let's not do that." it's great to learn that. How can I say this? There's no coincidence that Justin is an absolute perfectionist in what he's doing and has had this success he has. When I meet these artists who have these long careers, Christopher Cross is the same. Watching how he behaves at soundcheck with his band and what they talk about backstage, there's a level of detail and perfectionism that other artists just don't have. Other artists will say, oh, that'll do. Justin will never, ever say that will do. He'll say, I don't know, but we will all as a group work to figure out what the solution is before we move forward, right? And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that that the fans of the Moody Blues discography appreciate that. They hear that in their records. And I used to tell people that we play a lot of Moody Blues deep cuts in the show. And then I realized there's no such thing as deep cuts because the Moody Blues fans listen to absolutely everything. There's no deep cuts for them. It's just different songs, right? And that's a testament to his discography and his perfectionism at his craft. So yeah, I mean I could talk for hours and hours about working with Justin, but to sum it up, that's kind of what I'd say. It's like there's he respects his fans, and it's no coincidence that that there's a lot of work and perfectionism in what he's doing. Yeah.
Well, that is not surprising to me because you could see it when he's on stage. He's just like completely professional, and
Yeah.
you see him smiling at the audience, and he truly, really cares. You had mentioned
Yeah.
also Christopher Cross, who I'm a mega fan. I see him every time he's in town, and he's
Yeah.
pretty incredible. Very, very interactive on social media. Also, he's really incredible.
Just to share how much of a perfectionist Christopher Cross is about his sound, I noticed there was a gadget on his microphone, and I asked his tech, Shorty, his monitor tech, what that is, and he said it's something called an optical gate. What that is this is a laser pointed at Christopher's face, which means that when he walks away from the mic to do a guitar solo, the microphone turns off. So that the microphone is only on when the laser detects that he's about to sing. What that means is there's no excess bleed from the musicians on stage going through his vocal mic, which means the sound is just that much tighter. You know what I mean? These tiny little details are everywhere on stage for artists like Christopher and Justin. So there's so much that goes on in the technical end that just enhances those shows, and that is the reason that these people are where they are, and it's the reason why they've pulled the audiences that they have for so many years. Because there's no golden bullet, but there's like 1,000 little tiny silver like little decisions that lead up to that golden bullet that makes you a professional, with a long career. And those are those kind of little decisions.
Well, that's really fascinating about that laser. And, again, I'm not surprised because these people are complete, true professionals. His show, Christopher Cross, and I've seen him out of state, in state, other locations. And the show that he puts on, just with his... he's got this trio of women that are his backup singers, and they are in step, they are snapping, they are singing, literally like the choruses, and, it's just like a machine. They run that band like a machine. Every piece of it is doing its thing, and it's pretty incredible. It's so tight, and it's really wonderful to see that, but also to see how they all work together. And Justin did this, and also Christopher did this, but they took the time to introduce the band in the beginning and at the end of the show and talk about where they came from, like what country they come from, if they're from Paris or Japan or wherever. And that brings the audience into that, when, a band comes out and just says, hi and goodbye. We're all like, what's going on here? So that's kind of interesting. Yeah. So what are your...
as someone from a band, we really appreciate it when the artist does that, because we're there to fly our kites as well. And Justin's been so kind to me over the years of allowing me to do that. So it's very nice when he gives us shout outs on the stage, helps the audiences connect for sure.
That's really incredible. So between the two bands, just because I happened to see you that night, what are your favorite songs from both of those performances?
Well, Justin and Christopher. Well, with Justin, I'm obviously playing in that band. My favorite songs to play are Story in Your Eyes, because I get to just rip this kind of percussive guitar style in A minor, which is really, really, really fun. Question, because Question starts in a fun way. Justin shreds on this 12-string guitar, but the song starts with I just walk over to him and it's just us, just staring at each other. And Justin, under his breath, kind of without the audience hearing, will just go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we just go right into it, and the audience just loses their minds, you know. But on the softer side, I really like Forever Autumn. You know, that's an iconic song. And I get to do a nice little guitar solo, flute solo duel with the flautist. Nights of My Saturn. I mean, the whole set. Who am I kidding? The whole set is great. But with Christopher, I mean, I'm a big fan of Ride Like the Wind, like everyone is. I know it's a bit of a cliche, it's a big hit, but I grew up hearing the Saxon version of that song, a British heavy metal band, going back to my metal roots, right? So I've had that song with me through cover versions over the years. And there's another song, I think, is it Dreamers, that they would play most nights, which was really, really nice. I really like that. Some really cool chord changes, and the band are just so tight. And honestly, I just like watching Andy Suzuki just shred his little iwi, the electronic wind instrument. That's a very hard instrument to play, so it's great to see him play that so well.
Well, I appreciate the behind the scenes stories. That's really great. So, if you had the opportunity to be invited into another iconic performer, what would your short list be?
My gosh, that's an interesting one. I have given this some thought over the years because I've had some offers that I have, turned down for whatever reason. I had an offer to audition for Hans Zimmer and his band. But it was never meant to be because they already had the tour booked and I was already booked with Justin, you know. That would have been a treat to play things like, the Pirates of the Caribbean soundtrack and Gladiator and The Dark Knight, all those Thelma and Louise, all that stuff to arena audiences, obviously. But honestly, I have this rock and metal heritage. I would happily jump up with one of my many friends' touring bands and play something a little more in line with that kind of genre, and maybe stop the acoustic guitar altogether for a project, because I like the diversity in creativity, and I'm so involved with the acoustic guitar in my solo work that having a side tour where it was a totally different genre, that would be very interesting. So I try to do that as much as possible in the circles I swim in, but on a professional touring level, that would be a lot of fun. And I got close to that on the Periphery tour. I jumped up during their show, and Spencer and I would do Spencer the vocalist and I would do a Backstreet Boys cover or something like that together. That was a lot of fun. So we would come up with a different song to play on the tour bus every night. We would just write a song to play together that night as a little challenge. So honestly, I just like working with people, and if the people are nice, I'll play anything. So I don't know. My inbox is always open for ideas.
Well, that sounds exciting. I know. Well, the heavy metal and the rock stuff I get, but do you ever see yourself going into any kind of a bluesy world at all?
Absolutely. I mean, that was I did something approaching that. I played on a Dr. John recording. His record label Cleopatra reached out to me during COVID, and I joined a lot of blues guitar players to actually just play over some of his tunes. I actually have the CD just up there. It's just there. It's Dr. John. Is it Anthology? Gumbo Blues is the name of the record. And that's fun because I get to play electric guitar and like that. But as everyone gets older, they always get a little bit more bluesy. So I just turned 35. We'll give it another 5 years, and then we'll see how much kind of bluesy stuff comes out naturally.
Wow, you have a long time ahead of you.
I hope so.
Yes. Well, when I look at your bio, it is really very impressive, and you've done so much. So tell us some of the other things, in your background, regarding being a TV judge. Like, I'm not familiar with that. That must have been something done in the UK. So can you talk
It was
a little?
indeed. Yeah, of course. I mean, with this gig comes a variety of random experiences. I mean, I was a mentor on the TV show called Guitar Star on Sky TV. It was sort of, think of it as America's Got Talent, but just for guitar. And I mentored the finalist who ended up winning. So shout out to Gary Lutton, amazing guitar player. And I was invited back for season 2 as well for an episode. plenty of things like that. I recently did some guitars on the soundtrack of a very big video game that just came out called Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. It's the latest in the Prince of Persia franchise. So I recorded some heavy metal guitars for that, which is a lot of fun. One of the coolest things I've done recently is Justin brought me to Athens in Greece to play with the Athens State Orchestra, Symphony Orchestra, to play at the Odeon, just beneath the Acropolis, like in the ancient amphitheater, to play with a symphony orchestra playing Nights of Might Saturn and tunes from Days of Future Past with the full symphony orchestra with the original scores to 5,000 Greek people, and it was just incredible. There's I couldn't really hear much at the time because I had some really sort of old sort of ex-Soviet Union style brick in-ear monitor pack, which was very distorted, so all I heard in my ears was just white noise. But I had the string orchestra right behind me and I could feel what they were doing. I pulled my ear out and just enjoyed the moment. It was a full moon as well. It was just beautiful. So
Was that
so
recorded?
many things. I'm sure if you go on YouTube, you'll see some clips.
Wow,
It's,
I would love
it's
to
on,
see
on my
that.
social on my social media actually. If you go on my Instagram and Facebook, I'm sure you'll be able to find it from September 2023. But there's so many things. I mean, just to be able to play on a AAA video game, to be able to play on I had a little bit of guitar I played on was on some TV shows, some Netflix shows, things like this. It's great, but the real passion comes from playing in front of real people. I just love playing to real people and connecting with them and trying to help them forget about their nonsense.
Yes,
that's
well, that I appreciate.
it's a very equally selfish and selfless way to live, I think, is getting joy from providing joy, plus getting to see the world. So it's not entirely selfless by any means, but it's fulfilling, I think is the word. Yeah.
That's great. So just circling back to your music on the video games, did they ask you to actually write the music, or they just said play this, or how does that work?
It was pretty much play this with a few embellishments. So there was a little bit of composition, but it was very much a work for hire. It's actually the soundtrack was done by my dear friend Samar, who goes by Mentrix. She's an Iranian composer based out of Berlin. And she needed some heavy metal guitar, so I ended up going over to Berlin, and then I ended up tracking it a little bit in New York, a little bit here in my studio, and a little bit with her in Berlin. Not a lot of it, maybe like 3 or 4 tunes on the soundtrack, I think it was. There were some that got cut for time reasons, unfortunately. We were going to do more, but these mammoth video game soundtracks, there's so many moving parts, and it's if this deadline gets missed, then this gets axed, and it's a whole crazy mess. I'm just very grateful I get to manage my own schedule, and that's it, and not rely on Ubisoft Montreal or something like that. But that was an awesome experience. I'm so grateful for it. It's same kind of people over in Berlin. I did a bit of writing that ended up on Better Call Saul, the TV show, via the artist Fink, who's an amazing singer-songwriter and a very dear friend. So a lot of this stuff, it comes down to people who you know and who you love to work with, and that's the beautiful thing about the music industry, is you forge these connections over the years, and you never know when someone's gonna just could call you up and say, hey, I need X, can you deliver? And you just say yes and hope you get it right.
Yes. Well, I want you to start talking about your album. It's coming out this month. So exciting.
Do you mean this album that arrived in the mail yesterday?
Look at that. Tell
right
me.
Here.
Wow, that looks beautiful.
I know
it's
artwork.
It's a radio show, so they can't see it, but let me tell you, that's beautiful. It looks, is that a recording studio on the cover?
So this is what's called an anechoic chamber. And it's basically a room which, if all the surfaces look like this, with these little like spiky panels, there's zero sound. There's no reflections. So it's something that if you look it up on YouTube, an anechoic chamber, it's a very interesting thing. But there's a lot of metaphors here. This album is about sort of anxiety about the future, and then looking back to nostalgia to find sort of comfort, but then finding that by only looking backwards, it can be quite dangerous. So if you look at the theme of the album, we've got these 2 vintage televisions in an anechoic chamber, which represents the lack of inspiration that I had for quite a while during the pandemic. We have my guitar in the middle, and coming out of these vintage televisions is a sort of manifestation of this jellyfish, which represents the danger in that whole process of kind of not looking forward. You have to, I believe that everyone should kind of look forward to the future, reduce their anxieties about it, but also, embrace where you've come from, embrace nostalgia, embrace the people that have influenced you. And that whole theme became manifested in this record, which is available on vinyl for the very first time. I could not be happier with how these turned out. The audio quality is ridiculously good. The songs are my favorite songs, and my headline tour that I'm about to do in the USA, I'll have these, and the pre-orders have been crazy. It comes out in about a week, which is just insane to think. A new album is always a very stressful thing to put out into the world. It's like releasing a baby into the wild. That's an odd analogy, but it's releasing something into a fart in the wind, if you will. But hopefully this lingers around a little bit more than a fart in the wind. But
Wow.
Galactic Acid is its name, and it's some of my best playing, the best production. I just couldn't be more proud of it. I know that the people who have heard some of the songs so far have nothing but good things to say about it. So
where was it
it'll be available.
recorded, Mike?
So this was recorded. All but one song was recorded in a castle in the southwest of England. Just to get epic, So it was recorded in a castle converted into a recording studio just outside of Bath in the UK, very near to Peter Gabriel's studio. Let me just confirm that. Some electric guitar was recorded in both Australia and in Switzerland by some guest musicians. There's one song called The Woodroom that was recorded entirely in Nashville. And there was some violin that was recorded in Nashville by the amazing Janae Fleenor, who is the 4-time country music CMA Musician of the Year. She plays for Blake Shelton, Steven Tyler, Dolly Parton, everybody. She's the greatest fiddle player on the planet. It was an honor to have her on this record on a song, track 3, Segera, which I wrote in Kenya when I was staying over there for a while. So it's a very global record. And some of it was recorded before COVID, some of it during, some of it after. It's hence the theme of the record, right? So I'm very, very proud of it. Just the recording quality alone is just staggering by Josh Clark over in that castle in England. So
wow,
yeah,
so
it's available
exciting.
for pre-order at the moment, but it'll, by the time people hear this, it'll be out and available.
It'll be out. That's right.
At MikeDawes.com.
Very good. So tell us your social media and your website, because we're going to roll out with one of your songs called All Along the Watchtower.
Fantastic. Well, people might recognize the name of that song as a Bob Dylan tune, but that version is very much inspired by the Michael Hedges version, and I recorded the music video for this in Iceland under a waterfall. My guitar maker got very mad at me because the guitar got drenched, unfortunately. But my social media, it's my name is Mike Dawes, spelled Dawes, and MikeDawes.com is the place to go. Everything else you can find on there. You can find access to all my transcriptions, my guitar lessons, all that kind of stuff. I just want to help people ditch their electric guitars and switch to the acoustics. That's my goal. I want acoustical guitar sales to skyrocket when people discover this stuff. And I hope that it inspires people to forget about their worries, to invest their time in a passion, something that's universally just good and creative, and hopefully doesn't keep the neighbors up at night.
Wow. Well, it has been a pleasure to have you on the show, Mike. I look forward to your upcoming tour, and we will roll out with All Along the Watchtower. Thank you again, Mike.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.